Hey everybody, it's Andrew Brown and welcome to the free AWS Cloud Project Bootcamp. We are on week 1. I know that's really confusing because I made week 1, week 0, because I thought it was kind of like a coding thing and clever, and also it was going to be a light week. It made everything really confusing. So if you are ever running your own bootcamp, don't do what I do. Just start it at 1 and make your lives a little bit easier. So I have some slides to go through, and then I'll introduce you to our guest instructors. So let's get to it. I'm going to make the screen a lot bigger so you can see it. And I'm hoping that this week you have captioning. Last week, we did not know that there was a particular thing we had to configure. So I'm hoping that you are seeing captioning on YouTube. If you're not, I would recommend going over to the LinkedIn live stream because that one definitely has captioning. I'm going to paste it here in the YouTube just in case. If you don't see captioning, go to LinkedIn stream. As we are always trying to make these as accessible as possible. So let's get through our intros here and we will get to it. So this is the AWS Ontario Virtual User Group. This is the reason why we're doing it. I run this one. It's a virtual group. I live in remote Canada where nobody cares or knows about cloud. So my community has to be the virtual community. And so that's why you're all with me here. You are part of my community and you can join the AWS Ontario Virtual User Group where I like to do free training, hands-on training, every single month. And so that is what this is here that we are doing here today. I want to thank our sponsors. We have a couple sponsors that are helping us with the bootcamp in terms of the cost to run it. These things are free for you, but they're not free for me. So I want to have a big thank you for Adrian Cantrill. If you don't know Adrian, he makes free, or not free, but he makes paid AWS certification study courses, but they are high quality certification courses. I will just get my face out of the way so you can see the full link there. And I wanted to just point out there that this week we are dealing with Docker containerization, and he just happens to have a free Docker fundamentals course. So if you're looking for a resource to get started, that might be a good one to take a look out for. I'd also like to thank WeCloud Data. So WeCloud Data, they are a company in Toronto that specializes in both data and cloud training. So they are a accredited school. They run boot camps, they run workshops, they run career services. And so if you're looking for something that is a little bit more one-to-one, where you have fewer students and to teacher to student ratio, and you want people with very specific industry knowledge, especially in the Toronto area or the Canada area, to get a role, that is something to check out. They have their own YouTube where they're producing a lot of free video content. So it's always great to have more free video content, and I recommend you go check them out as well. And you know, they do have really good results. A lot of their students end up at large companies, and they have a high placement rate, good reviews, all those great numbers. So you know you can trust them. I recommend them. I personally know them, and that's why they are one of the sponsors. I want to thank AWS as they helped us provide AWS credits for Canada and US students to take this bootcamp. I also got credits for She Clouds. If you're wondering, those credits are coming. I just got to vendor them out. But that makes it a lot easier for us to reduce spend. And we will talk about spend because everyone's always concerned about spend, and we'll be very sensitive about that. But I just wanted to point out, it says WeCloud Data up here. It should say it should say AWS. I just noticed that was probably in there last time, but there are hundreds of user groups around the world, and there is mine, AWS Ontario Virtual User Group. If you are in a region outside of Canada, it's always great to join your local user group because there's always great resources there and good friends, and I strongly recommend it. So just a reminder of schedule. Every Saturday until May, we are meeting every noon Toronto time. And these videos are recorded. They get into the official video playlist, so you can catch up later on, but it's great we can join the stream. Just remember to read the FAQs, to read the outlines, the codes of conducts, the Discord announcements, and most of this is linked to the AWS Cloud Project Bootcamp.com. The Discord is closed. You had to register in time to get in there. It's just the nature of it. But for those who did not register in time, you can still come along for the journey and learn at your own pace. Remember, it's not about the grade. It's about you personally learning and solving this stuff. But, you know, if you did get into the bootcamp in time for registration and get those additional resources, that is great too. So I just want to introduce our guest speakers, James and Edith. And we also have Shala back again as our student advocate. So I'm going to bring them into the stream right now so they can introduce themselves. And so, James, would you like to go first?
You are unmuted.
James, you're on mute today. That's okay.
There we go. Hopefully you can hear me now. Yeah. So hi everyone. My name is James Spurrin. I'm a Docker captain, and outside of Docker captaincy, I create courses on DevOps, Kubernetes, and cloud native.
Yeah. Are you mute now?
No, I'm just managing multiple things. I have Bako talking in my ear, and so he's saying I was sharing my screen. I was not. Edie, if you want to go introduce yourself.
Yeah, of course. Hello, everyone. I'm really happy to be here. I am from Peru, and I am Technology Evangelist at Percona, and also Docker Captain. I'm here to support you. If you have any questions about the bootcamp, just write it in the respective week one. So we are here to answer your questions about Docker and containerization.
Hello, I'm Shala. So I am a AWS community builder and I'm acting as the student advocate. So I'll be scanning the various chats during the live stream to try to answer questions as I can. And yeah, happy to be here. Second session. Yay.
Great. Just a reminder to everyone, the boot campers here, the way this works is we will be going until 2 p.m. and then we have a hard stop. So whatever we cover, we cover. Anything we are not able to cover, I will polyfill with additional videos. But the most important thing is I want to bring that expert knowledge that both Edie and James can bring, because I can do Docker, but I sure heck don't know what I'm doing with it. So I'm hoping that they will help correct or polyfill that kind of stuff, and we can help raise everybody's knowledge. Before we jump into the Docker content, I do want to do a reminder about spend, because I really want to make sure that spend is not going overboard here. So what I'm going to do is go back and share my screen here for a moment. I'm just going to bring it up here. And there's two things I want you to check out. I'll bump this up for a moment here. So two things that you should be doing every single week is checking. Well, I say two things, but do as much as you need to do to check your spend. But the first thing is go into your bills and check and make sure that the spend is what you expect it to be. So if you're on free tier and you expect $0 in here, make sure it's $0. Okay. And if it's not $0, go find out why. Another thing is to go over to your free tier. So it's over here on the left-hand side. I do not have free tier. It's all gone for me. So here, what you'll see is a list of free tier services, and it will tell you the usage. We had a lot of usage for folks that spun up CloudTrail watching Ashish's video. So just be mindful of those things and keep on top of it. You are responsible for your bill, for Gitpod as well. So I guess it's three things. If you go to the gitpod.io website and you go up to your avatar at the top, user settings, and you go to billing, you can see how many credits you have utilized for the month. So just trying to help you stay in a free tier. If this depletes, you will not be charged. You will be A-okay. You'll just have to switch over to code spaces, but conserve where you can, and hopefully that helps. Shala, are there any top of mind questions that we might want to address for students before we go into instruction here?
The only thing I could think of is I am seeing a lot of is homework due right now.
Yeah, so the way homework works is it's due by next class, but technically, but in practice, it's really going to be when we go check it. So I've changed the way grading works, and now you can submit late. And so there's just more of a consideration that if you submit a bit too far out, we'll just factor that into your grades. But generally, when we go mark is what we're going to see. So if there's nothing there, it's going to be hard for us to mark very late work. But generally, try to get it in by next class. But we'll figure it out as we start to do grading, since we've yet to grade a single student. So maybe that will change. So for folks, what we accomplished last week was we created architectural diagrams. We installed the AWS CLI. If you're in your student portal, and I'll see if I can pull that up here just to go look at the checklist. Here I am. Under submissions, we go to week 0. And so my expectation is that everyone was able to checkbox all of these things in the to-do list because these are required. So at this point, you should have an AWS CLI, a billing alarm, and a budget, so we're not worried about spend. So what I'm going to do is go over to my own personal repo, which is Omen King at AWS or AWS Bootcamp Crowder 2023, and you'll notice that I have branches. This is where I'm working ahead of you and providing additional instructions. So if we go into week 1, and I would recommend opening this because then you'll have the instructions. If you go down the journal, my journal is not journaling. It's just instructional content that's going to help you along. If you open it up, we can see here all the instructions that we are going to walk through today's stream. So that is something that I'd like you to do. I'm going to go paste this in the stream so you can all find it here. There you are. And so hopefully that's been distributed out to LinkedIn and to YouTube. So there you go. And so now what I'm going to do, and this is not what you're going to do, I'm going to make a new branch because I'm trying to keep history for you to go through. For you, you just work in the main branch because that is what we are going to grade. And so I'm going to go off of week 0. So I renamed in the instructional video you saw, it was called week 1. I corrected it. Now it's called week 0 again. So I'm going off my branch. You're just going to work off a main. So I'll click into branches here, and we will go and create a new branch. Again, I'm only doing this. You don't need to do this. And I'll go to week 0. I'm going to say week 1 again. Create the branch. And so I'm going to go to my code. I'm going to switch to week 1 again, and I'm going to launch my Git pod. And I apologize, I'm all over the place, but we'll get started here. So what I want all you folks to do is to launch your Git pod accounts in your main branch. And when you do, can we get some +1s? And then we'll know that we can proceed forward here. So just wait for it to spin up. By the way, I wonder if people noticed my cup. I'm just going to show it here. We might be using them sometime later in the boot camp. If anyone else wants to send me swag, I'll promote it. And I really appreciate the folks that are sending super chats. It really does help us for the boot camp when supporting it. I've never used it before, so I'm not exactly sure on how to utilize it. But it looks like that Nirva have sent us some money. And also, Ariana, and we appreciate your help and the support for the bootcamp. We're learning stuff all the time here. So anyway, I'm seeing a lot of +1s. So we are ready to do some instruction. I am going to go over here and we are going to look at the basic instructions over here. Nope. Sorry, I'm a little bit mixed up myself. Here we go. And here are the instructions. So I guess the question is, why are we containerizing our applications? Because we have the code here, and we have the ability to run these applications without containers. And the first thing I'm going to do is just bump up our font here so we can see what we're doing. Okay, so 24. It's because between streams, I'm always reducing the font for my own personal use. And then when the stream comes back on, I have to bump it back up. So why couldn't we just start up the applications normally, like do an npm install, npm start? We can do that, but I think the advantage of containerizing your application is that it makes it more portable so that if you want other folks not to have to spend so much time configuring them, you're basically handing over the configuration to them. And also, it allows you to be closer to the actual end environment that you plan on deploying. So I guess my question to Edie and James, what do you think about that? Do you think containerization is like something that every folks should be doing? That it's great for development production? Is there use cases that maybe we wouldn't want to use it for?
Edie, you go first.
Yeah, I think it's good to know it, how to containerize an application. if you are working in development and testing environments, because it allow you to don't destroy your environment if you are testing a lot of things, a lot of applications, so you can easily kill a container and start it again and again. um, yeah. And you, James, what do you think?
Yeah, well, obviously, we're quite biased here, and my viewpoint on this is pretty much wherever possible to containerize. And the example that you've actually got, which we're actually going to go through, which we set out, which involves Node and npm, is a great example, because when you actually take away that containerization and you go to run an application, and for example, we're talking about Node, but even as simple as Python, when you actually go to do it, you're going to have variants on your system. You can have different versions of Python. You may or may not have compilers on your system. Some modules, when you actually install them with Python, so you do your, pip install -r requirements, some of those will actually require compilation. And we've got over 1,000 different people here. It's going to be thousands of different variants of operating systems and configs, whether you have a compiler or not. And it just greatly simplifies everything. So you have that base that you're actually working from. Somebody else has been able to actually test that and verify that it works with that environment. So yes, I pretty much push, even if it's a simple Python program, get that Dockerfile in there and mimic it so that person, that individual, can run that code or application, whatever it is, the same way that you are running it locally.
And you know what? I always thought, or I mean, I not so thought, but I guess like there's always the hurdle of thinking like, if I'm going to work with containers, how harder is it to work with containers? And I do feel there's a tiny bit of friction, but once you know the ropes, I kind of forget about them. So I don't know, like James, if you go back to the first time you learned, do you remember how long it took you to get really good at working with containers? Did it take a long time? Same question to Edie. Did it take a long time, or did you feel that you got over the most common things quite shortly, and it became part of your workload or tools?
What actually happened for me? So traditionally, my background used to be in ISPs, and I used to run a lot of services myself. So I would run home labs, I would run Apache mail servers, various different things. And there's a great project called linuxserver.io, and linuxserver.io have heaps and heaps of various container images on there. So yeah, you're just bringing this up. They have stacks of container images, and gradually over time, I started transitioning to these various container images. So rather than actually compiling and building things myself, I switched over to actually using using these. And what's really quite nice about them, if you actually look at any of the examples, most of the Docker files that they actually provide there are high quality examples. They're well documented. The Docker files follow best practices. And my learning path was actually using these, seeing what they had actually done. And then when Linux Server didn't provide an image that I actually needed, I started building my own, and I used their examples for reference.
That's interesting. And I guess we can click through all of them and go to them on Docker Hub. I remember seeing this the other day. I just didn't know what it was, linuxserver.io, when I was searching. But I didn't realize they maintained a variety of different containers.
Yeah.
For those folks that don't know, what is Docker Hub?
Is that a question for me?
Either or.
So Docker, Docker Hub is a container registry, and it's a container registry provided by Docker, where you can actually host your own container images for private purposes, or you can actually host and share your own image. So essentially, when you build your own container image, you're going through the process of actually pushing that image, and that's a terminology which is actually used. You're pushing that image to a container registry, and then when somebody else wants to actually consume that image, they pull the image. And you can actually see that. There's a nice example there on Docker Hub. When you actually click through any of the various images, you get that pull. You can actually see there it provides you a nice link that you can actually click that and copy that to your clipboard. And then if you pasted that into your terminal or your command prompt, that would actually do it. And just quickly on that note, with container registries, there's other container registries out there. So there's various different ones. Docker Hub is great. It's free to use. There's other great ones which are also free. And essentially, there's something for everyone to look into as an afterthought is OCI, the Open Container Initiative. There's standards around how you build images, how you build registries, etc. And Docker Hub is classed as it follows the OCI standard for registries. So this registry or another, as long as they follow those same standards, your software should be compatible with them, even if you're using something else outside of Docker Hub.
I like to think of when we look at Docker Hub or ECR or any of these other providers for our students here or boot campers here. I just think of it's like, imagine it's like the GitHub for your images, your Docker images. Not exactly the same because it's not exactly storing code; it's storing the images. But if that helps as a mental model, that is something you can do. Edie, when you are working with Docker containers, do you push to Docker Hub? Is there some other place we can place them? Do you have any thoughts around that?
Sure. I started using Docker Hub in the past when I started learning Docker. Everything that I was trying to do, push it in Docker Hub to make it available for all the team, so they can able to push it and test it easily. And I got feedback very fast. Yes, I love it, but there, as James says, there is other container registries out there, but Docker Hub has like is more time in the market, and it's free.
Yeah, so there's probably different ones specialized for different things. I think I heard of one that's like called JFrog. I don't know where it's used. Maybe it's more for on-prem, or maybe cloud native prefers different ones. But sorry, do you might know of this JFrog? Yes.
JFrog for Artifactos to save binaries, right?
Does that can that
Yes,
host container images?
Yeah,
or is it an artifact?
You can also save it.
Oh, there is?
Yeah, I think it's more for Artifactos, for jars that you generate in Java, for example.
If folks are wondering what we're talking about artifacts, there's repositories for images like Docker containers, and there's artifacts which are could be like libraries. So like you say, I want to use this open source library, but I'm going to check it and manually make sure it's okay, or we have our own libraries managed. If you use GCP, they have a service called Artifact Registry, which handles both images and artifacts, but some of these services will do one or the other or both. So that is coverage of where these containers are, why you might want to use containers. Somebody was asking like code to container stuff. That's what we're doing here today. So what we've listed out here for our instructions is we are going to write a couple Docker files. We are going to get them running, and then we're going to get them working together with Docker Compose. So I hope you are as excited as I am to do this. So looking at our instructions, I think the first thing I put here was the VS Code Docker extension, because if you are using VS Code, I think it makes it a lot easier because you can see them running in VS Code. And also, a lot of times you can just right click and not write code. And sometimes I'm not the best at writing Docker commands. I'm terrible at Docker commands. I can't remember them to save my life. And so on the left-hand side, I can't make this bigger. I can try. Let's see. Oh, yeah, it does. You will see a thing that looks like a whale that has containers on its back. And that is the Docker logo. And if I click there, this is where we'll be able to see our containers, our images, and other stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the Explorer on the left-hand side, and I'm going to go to our front-end our back-end application first. I'm going to create a new file called dockerfile. And so this is where we are going to put our Docker configuration. And so we'll go back to the instructions here, and you will see I'm saying to make that file there, and we will copy the contents of this file, and we'll paste the contents here. Okay. And so this is where I want everyone to be. So can I get a +2 when you folks have been able to get the instructions, create the Docker file here, and paste that on in there? And then we'll talk about this. I do not see the whale. I'm missing the Docker extension. So that's what Gloria is asking in the audience. We are using Gitpod, so it should be installed by default. Sometimes when Gitpod launches up, it doesn't appear right away. If you aren't seeing the extension, on the left-hand side, there are extensions blocks over here. And if I was to type in Docker, it shows that this one's already installed. If you're using your local developer environment, like on your machine, you have to have Docker pre-installed, which can be a bit of work. You could use Docker Desktop, and then you install this. But for those, I'm recommending that we all work through Gitpod because it'll launch it by automatically. So if you do fall behind because you don't have Gitpod or there's a misconfiguration, that's okay. This is recorded. We'll be able to go back. So I'm seeing +2s for a lot of folks. When you made the file, do you give it a file extension? So like for Docker files, they just don't have file extensions. It's just there's some things that are like that: proc files, make files. I'm not sure why there's no extension. James or Edie, do you know why there's no extension? They just don't have one. For fun?
It's a good question. I've always just seen them as just named Docker file. I've never really thought about the extension, to be honest.
Yeah. So that is like an unsolved mystery, just like the UFOs. Maybe one day we'll find out. So we have this file open. What are we looking at? We have a bunch of code. What is this? Edie or James?
Yeah, each line of this Docker file are instructions about how you run your application. If you run it in into your local host with a requirement txt, you needed to add every instruction in this recipe Docker file.
And so this syntax language, I don't even know where to look it up. I think that the way I learned it was watching a bunch of tutorials and looking at other examples, but I don't think the syntax is too hard. So the first line here, if we're all looking carefully here, we have this thing that says from Python 3.1.10 Slim Buster. And so this, as far as I understand, comes from Docker Hub, because by default, when you put this in, as far as I understand, it always goes to Docker Hub. So if I go to Docker Hub over here, and we'll give it a moment to load, and we were to search Python, I go here, I can see we have the official Python image. If I scroll on down, you'll see all these tags. I don't understand the tags like bullseye and buster and stuff like that. I know there's differences. Maybe some are slimmer than others. I mean, that's probably why it's called slim. I know what Alpine is. It's a particular Linux OS, but these are all different versions. Why they do it? Because people have lots of different configurations, and so you have more options to it. But let's take a look at the one that we chose here. It's called 10 Slim Buster. So I'm going to go see if I can find that, or 3.10 Slim Buster. So here it is down below. There's clearly newer versions, but this is what we were using when we made it. So I'm going to click into it. And so I can actually see that this is doing something else. So this Docker file is loading another Docker file. Isn't that fun? And so we can see in here, I know we're getting into the weeds. This is, what's that movie where they go into dreams, but we're going into Docker files. So this is
Waterfall.
Waterfall.
Yeah, Inception, isn't it?
Vanilla Sky, or there's lots of movies that that you go into dreams, but we're in Dockerception. Okay. And so and we could look this one up, and this one might have stuff in it, right? So like I could go to this one. Should I even dare? Let's find out what's in that one. And we will go inside of Debian. At some point we should hit rock bottom, right? And we might see something else. So I'm just kind of curious. So we go here, and if folks don't know, Debian is a Linux distribution. So Buster Slim, we'll go into that one. Folks, you just need to watch. You don't have to dig these up. And so now it says from scratch, okay, add root fts tar bash. So literally we have nothing. I know what's happening here. What it's doing is it's installing Debian at this point. So we're really at rock bottom here. Sometimes you hit that. But the interesting thing is you can crawl through these files and see what they're installing. So like if we're wondering what is in this Python Slim Buster, we can go here and we can see that it's installing stuff. So here I can see it's installing certificates. I'm going to make this bigger. So it's installing certificates, NetBase, ZT data. That's probably time zones.
Just to interject there, Andrew. So,
Yep.
so that Scratch one is actually interesting, and that actually is, it's an official Docker image, but it's an official empty image. So that is essentially your ground zero.
Empty image. We're
Yeah,
running on Vapor,
well,
vaporware.
Not so much, but really it's that second command which is what is actually doing here. So you can kind of think of that as like a no-op operation, and then this is actually adding in that bare minimum root file system. So if you go to Docker Hub and you actually search for Scratch,
I didn't even think you could search it. I thought we were just,
because Scratch is an official image.
folks, this is why we have the experts here. I would have never known this stuff. Okay, so we type in Scratch.
Yep. There you go.
I never thought of searching it. I just assumed we were at rock bottom. So explicitly empty image. Okay. So, but what's, oh, I guess it's empty. I was gonna say, what's in it? Nothing.
Yeah.
There's nothing in it.
Essentially you're meeting that requirement where you are actually, and there it's used the same term as I've used it. It's a no-op. So essentially all you're doing is fulfilling that criteria of where you're starting from. So you're meeting the criteria in the doc file where you have that from a statement, and then you're actually, in this case, it's that Debian one you was looking at was copying a minimal root file system across.
So when you say no op, is that short for no operations, because we're not performing any automation other than copying the contents of something into there?
Yeah, exactly. So essentially you can think of this in some way that this is actually just being ignored.
Okay, so that means when we come back to that file there we saw a moment ago, and what it's doing is that there is a tar file. So it's probably an archive, like think of a zip file, and all it's doing is taking it to the root of this. It's just dumping the contents of it. And so that's part of it.
It's a minimum file system, and just if you just bring that one up on the screen, this is actually good to go from the top. Sorry, bring the example down. So that's it. So scroll there. So what actually happens with each command you have in a Docker file will essentially create a layer. So what you're ending up with this is a Docker image which comprises of 3 layers. So you would have the no-op, the Scratch, then you would have the root file system, and then an entry where you've actually got that command there of bash. And every time you create when you're working with Docker files and you're creating Docker images, you are essentially creating layers. So imagine you've actually got those 3 layers that we actually showed you. So Andrew showed you those. We've got those 3 layers. And then going back to that other example, which then used that's it. If you scroll to the top of this, now essentially this is creating layers. So it's creating more layers on top. So when you actually see that from Debian Buster Slim, we know it's using 3 layers. And then all of these commands that run on top will be creating more layers. So more and more and more and more. And something worth knowing about with the way containers work, they use a concept of it's a union file system. So imagine you've got all of these layers which are actually stacked on top. They using a union file system, it becomes one merged layer. Essentially you see it. But if, for example, you had a layer at the bottom which created a file, and then you had a layer further up that deleted that file, from the merged view, you wouldn't see the file, even though it existed in a lower layer. So everything kind of builds on top, and you have this view which looks downwards.
So I think when we build a Docker file, we should be able to see the images, and maybe we can point that out as a visual. I think, right? When we build it, we should see
Yeah.
it. Okay.
Yeah.
So just to walk through this a little bit for the Python one, I'm just going to scroll down here. I just want to show you all this stuff here. Like all this stuff is what's getting installed here. So if you're ever wondering what is in a Docker file, you can look at it. You'd have to have knowledge of bash scripting. So like here, apt-get install is a means to install. So having some Linux knowledge is useful there. But generally, it helps you understand how this thing is built. I know it looks kind of gobbledygook because the reason why it looks like this is because sometimes they're trying to optimize these to reduce the amount of layers to make it smaller and stuff like that. So when we write ours, it's not going to look as complicated as this. But here you're starting to see Python. So somewhere, I'm just going to search for Python. They install Python. I'm just going to see where it is. So here we can see that they're actually downloading Python from the Python website. Okay, so I just wanted to show our boot campers that you don't need to have this level of knowledge. I just wanted to get you exposure to be comfortable opening these things up and knowing where they come from, because we always want to know where things come from. So I'm just going to close out these tabs and we're going to make our way back here. So we know where all this stuff is coming from. The first command, work directory, I believe switches us to the work directory for this one here. Actually, no, this is the work directory within because remember, we have a host operating system and a guest operating system. So the host operating system is the operating system that we're on, right? And the guest operating system is going to be the container. So we have to try to think of it as a separate entity. Is that right?
Edie, do you want to go or shall I?
Go ahead.
Yeah, so this the way to actually think about this from a work directory perspective is where this is actually going to work from when the container actually starts. So essentially, if you let's just say you put everything into a directory called /hello. And let's just say you had an application which was in a directory called /hello. You could either have your command change to that directory and then run the application, or you can actually simplify it and say, this is my work directory. A good way of actually thinking about this, when you log in, when you log into a Unix system, or you bring up your terminal, automatically you are taken to your home directory. So on a Mac, you would go to /users/James in my case, or if you logged into a remote Unix box, you would end up in /home/James, and you can liken that to a work directory. So automatically you have been taken to that, and this is an equivalent from a Docker side.
So I guess my question is, and I'm just going to put container here. We'll put this in the top left corner. So like right now we have this one here. This is called backend Flask, right? And so it exists here on our host operating system. And then the idea is we want to have a container over here, and it has a guest operating system, and then it has its own folder called backend Flask. So I guess my thought is like when we do work directory here, we're talking about this new one that's going to live within the guest OS.
Correct. Yes.
Okay. So, and that's the hard part, I think, to understand is that when you're using container, when you're running these commands, are we talking about the host OS or the container OS? And so, folks,
no. Yeah. So
oh, sorry. Yes.
Yes. Sorry, I thought you were asking a question. And carry on.
Oh, sorry. So yeah, folks, we are talking about this one here, and I realize it's a bit jarring at first, but you get used to it. So this is going to take, so first we're saying change the work directory to there. And now we're saying copy this file requirements.txt. And now we're back on the host OS. I'm gonna put comments on here. Guest OS?
No. It's not guest OS. So that just to clarify on that work directory. Yeah, that work directory is within the container.
Okay, so how would we refer to within the container? Just container? Because isn't guest OS? Isn't the guest OS within the container?
Exactly. So imagine on that. Imagine in the container you had a folder as you've actually got called /backend /backend -flask, and everything that you were actually doing within the container. Let's just say you were running a command or anything else. You wanted that process, whichever process is going to actually run, you wanted it from a process perspective to be in /backend -flask. That's what work directory does. It essentially puts you into that. It whatever runs in the container, it kind of puts it as an entry point, a starting base.
Okay. If I am not wrong, James, guest OS is when we are working with virtual machines, right? When we are working with Docker, it's just a container because we are using the Docker engine in the bottom of everything, right? Yes.
Yes. So, sorry. So, Waleed, I know Waleed, he knows Kubernetes really well. And yeah, now my brain is waking up. So the thing is, and as Edie says correctly, it's that guest OS is when we're talking about virtual machines, because we have a hypervisor that gets installed on host machines that allows us to have guest OSs. But when we're talking about Docker containers, it's a bit different, or containerization, it's different because we're interfacing in a different way. So I was just trying to find a term of like when we're here and when we're there. And so we're just going to say another OS because it's just an abstraction away. So when we're talking here,
yeah. What you've actually got there, so essentially it's the kernel which is actually shared. The Linux kernel is shared. So for Docker or for anything to actually run, you've got that Linux kernel, and essentially that OS then could be another Linux variation. So it could be a Ubuntu, it could be a CentOS, it could be an Alpine.
Oh, sure.
An AWS Linux, and essentially that Linux. The terminology where this gets confusing is Linux distributions versus the Linux kernel. So you've got many different types of Linux distributions, but they all use the Linux kernel. So the Linux kernel is shared. The Linux distribution, you can essentially choose it within your container image. And so we have got a Debian Linux distribution as our another OS.
Sure. Yeah, I guess what this matters to me is we're just distinguishing what's coming from where, because when you're in this file, it's hard to know when we're working outside the container or inside the container. So I think to make it easy, because clearly it's very technical, the logic gets, like if you use the wrong words, it gets really confusing. And it's my fault for sort of saying guest OS and I should have known better. I'm going to say inside the container and outside the container, so that we know where these things are happening. So the first command here, working directory, is imagine you're in a new computer that's in a container, and we're going to change the working directory to this one. So it's basically making a new folder like this one. So I'm going to say, inside container, make a new folder inside the container. And the next one here is copying. So outside the container, over here, the requirements.txt, we're going to copy it to inside the container. Why do we want this requirements.txt? This contains the libraries we want to install to run the app. Okay. Then below here, we have a pip install requirements. So this actually will install the Python images to used for the app. Okay, and again, this is happening inside the container. This is getting copied from here to there. Then down below, we have another command, which is copy period period. So copy period 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 is a special way. Yes?
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you. In the line 12, it should be install the Python libraries, right? Because in requirements, we have all the libraries
Oh,
and not
sorry, yes.
images. Yeah, okay.
Libraries, I apologize. And then in this, we have a special command, period. So period means, in my sense, everything. Okay, everything in the current directory.
Yep.
This is a Linux thing. So when we say period, the first period represents everything in backend Flask outside the container. And then the second period, first period, second period represents backend Flask inside the container. Okay, so remember when we did this up here? In future commands, we are in this directory. So when we do period, it's like it's already here. That's why we're putting period and we're not doing backend Flask. If we had not done this, I think we would have had to do this. Right? But we want to be in that folder to make it easier because that's where we'll have to run the app. So I'm going to comment that back out. Then we have an environment variable. So environment variables are a way for us to configure our application. We learned about environment variables last class. So this will set it for the entire environment. We have this expose thing. We have these curlies things with port in it. And then we have this CMD thing. So environment variables is set environment variables. I like to say nvars because it's easier to say. And it's easier to spell because I can't spell to save my life. And so these get set inside the container, just to clarify. Okay, because outside we don't need to set things. These are being set inside the container and will remain there, remain set when the container is running. Okay, and then we have this expose port in CMD. We'll come back to the expose port because it's kind of an odd one. But let's look at the CMD command. So CMD stands for command, I believe. All right.
Yep.
What does it stand for? Command, main. Sometimes these things stand for other things. And so we have this thing where it says Python 3-m flask run host port. I'm trying to scroll to the right. So what is this command? Well, this is the command that you would use to run Flask. How do I know? Because if we go here into our application, I'm going to type clear here. And I know it's a bit hard to see, so I'll have to drag it to the left here. If I was to cd into the backend Flask, okay, and I want all our students to do this here, okay? Gloria, we'll talk about the ports here in a moment. We're going to circle back. But if we want to run this, right, we're going to go up here and do the same thing. So here we want to do pip install. So I'm going to type in pip. I think it's pip3. Let's see, pip3 install -r requirements.txt and hit enter. I want all the students right now, or boot campers, to type in pip install -r requirements.txt. To save you some folks, I'll just paste it in here. Can I paste it in here? The chat? It's not letting me for some reason. But anyway, can I get a +3 if you've cd'd into this directory? So you typed in cd back in Flask. And then you're in that directory, and then you ran this pip3 install -r requirements. So I'm getting a few +3s here. We'll just give a moment here. Okay. Is anyone stuck? Can I get a 0 if you're stuck? I'm watching the stream for comments. Okay, it looks like we're getting lots of +3s. That's good. Okay, so yeah, so it should have installed all these plugins, right? And then what we'll do is we'll go back over. We got a couple zeros. If you're stuck, just tell me why, and we'll see what we can do. But anyway, so we ran this line here, and so now there's this command here. So I'm just going to go above it. I'm just going to type it out again. So -m flask run --host equals 0.0.0.0 --port equals 4567. I think that is right. So this is the command that is running. Every web application framework works a little bit different. They're all a little bit different. So I'm not too worried if you can memorize this. It's not that important. You can always Google it and find out how to start stuff up. But here we're running Python 3. So Python has an older version called Python 2. Sometimes Python 3 means just Python 3. But sometimes people have both installed, so we have to distinguish between the two. It does -m, so I don't know what that flag is for, but it's clearly indicating that it has something to do with Flask. It's going to
It's
run.
for a module. So that's
great.
Yeah, that's specifying to use the Flask module. So this is essentially a shortcut way of running Flask. So
okay, I did not
yeah.
know that. Cool. So so -m is for module. --host. We're binding to 0.0.0.0. I'm going to tell you this. You do this a lot when we are trying to expose an application outside the scope of the environment that we're running. 0.0.0.0. I just explained it as the everything address. It's a little bit more complicated than that. But the point is that by default, it wouldn't run on 0.0.0.0. It'd run on, I think, 27.0.0.1 local host. And when we were running containers, we need to set this to 0.0.0.0. That's all I remember. So in practicality, that's important. We're telling it to start on port 4567. These port numbers for applications, they sometimes start on 3000, 4567, 8080, 8000. You know, just different frameworks like to settle on different ones. You could use other ports, but it's just what people like to do. And I think Flask generally likes to do 4567. I wouldn't sweat it too much about the port numbers. So I'm going to copy this command. I'm going to paste it in. I'm going to hit enter and fingers crossed that it runs. Looks like it's running. Notice down below it says a service port is available on 4567. I'm going to go to my ports tab right here. And I know it's hard to see, so I'll try to make it bigger. But there are these two locks. And this is maybe a Git pod specific thing. I'm going to unlock it for 4567. If I don't do that, I won't be able to see it. So I want a +4 if you're able to get it running on 4567 and you unlock the port. And I'm just going to scroll back up here so folks who are trying to type this command in have a chance to run this command. Okay, so I'm seeing +4s. That's great. So if this is running and you have it unlocked, that means that we should be able to see it. So if you see this link here, you can click this link. It should open a new tab. And it says not found. The request URL is not found on the server. I think that's okay. Let's go back here for a second. Notice that we have a 404. So I'll just make this a bit smaller. Look, every time I refresh this page, I'm just going to hit refresh a few times. Look at this. It's getting requests and it's going 404, 404, not found. So the server's running and it's accepting requests in. So that is good. But it's saying that nothing is showing up, which is totally fine because the way this works is that it's at a specific endpoint, activities, home, I think. So I don't remember the endpoint here. So I will have to go back over to our documentation and scroll on down. I'm just going to find it here. So it should look something like this. Is it in here again? I'm getting a 500 error. I'm not sure why. Oh, you know why? It's because we need some environment variables configured when we start this up. But my point is that if you got it to 404, that's good. That means it's running. But we have to configure a few more things. And so that is one of the advantages of having containerization, we can have containers set up the things that we need to make it work. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to check the code base because there's some environment variables I know that we need to set. I'm going to go to the bottom here. I think they're in the container. So there's a couple that we need to set as the front end and the back end here. I'm going to see if we'll see if we can work around this. So I'm just going to go here for a second. Just watch for a moment. I'm just going to see if I can fix this really quickly in the code, because it looks like my app isn't working exactly how I want it to. Somewhere in here we have, oh, it's at the top. Bako's whispering in my ear. He's like, how to solve it. So the reason why the application was not working was because we need to feed into two environment variables into it, one called Frontend URL and one called backend URL. When we started up that application, we did not feed in any environment variables to it. And that's probably the reason why it's failing. So an easy way to fix this is just to set the environment variables, and that will resolve the issue. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the application. I'm going to type in clear so I can see what I'm doing. I'm going to bump up the font so it's nice and big. And I want to see if I can set those environment variables to resolve the issue. So we have one called Frontend URL and one called Backend URL. When we are working with origins, there's a lot of different things you can set for them. I'm just going to do asterisk to try to make it work. So I'm going to type in export. I'm just going to set them in my machine locally here. Export, Frontend URL, double quotations, star, enter. And then we're going to try the backend here. So we'll go here and we'll see if this fixes it locally. When we want to run the container, we'll have to do this again. So you'll see here in a moment. And we'll see if this fixes our issue. I'm hitting up on my keyboard to get back to the last command. I'm going to hit enter. It starts up very quickly. I'm going to check the port. It is open. I'm going to click the link, go back here, and now I get data. So there we go, fixing things on the fly. We can do it. So what I want you to do, were you getting nervous, or it's like being in a car with someone and it's like really icy. It's like you can't. It's like bad weather, but we get through it. So I'm going to stop this command. Oh, by the way, that's Control-C on my keyboard. So I want to ask folks. Okay, this is what I want you to do. I want you to do a export frontend URL. Okay, I'll put this in the comments here. We'll add it as we go. I'm just trying to think here in my journal.
Hey, just a quick one. Just a quick one, Andrew, because I've seen this question come up. There's a few people who are asking the same question, and it's the difference between command and run. So they've seen run further up. So just to explain, with this dockerfile, we're actually building a container image, and essentially the run is a command that we're actually running to create a layer in the image. So for example, if we wanted to install htop, for example, the run command would be apt install htop. Then that would actually install htop and it would become an image of the container. Command is different, and it's different to run. This is essentially the command that the container is going to run when it starts up. So you can think of using run as this is the setup process, everything we actually need to put in that container image, and it builds the image. And then command is what will actually run inside that container image when you run it as a container.
Cool. For folks who are wondering about like where I'm going to get these instructions that I just wrote, I'm writing them in for you right now. That's how we do it. We just go as we go. So here's an example of us running it. We'll just have to do cd ... when you're done. So, okay, and I will save that. So if you folks have this file open, I'm going to paste it again into the chat. Just give me a moment here. I'm just going to go grab it here and paste it in again, just so we all have it. Sorry, I have way too many windows. Okay, so these are the apologies. So these are the three things we ran right now. So we cd'd into that directory. You're going to run the front-end URL. You're going to run the export backend URL. You're going to run this to start it up. Once you start it up, we're going to make sure we unlock the port and that it's running. You're going to click here. And I guess you need the URL. So I'm just going to grab that there for you as well and just add those instructions. We'll go down below here. So make sure to unlock the port tab, open the link for 567 in your browser, change the URL to this. You should get back JSON. Okay, so I'm going to update that there right now. And I'm just going to ask when you folks see it, if anyone has gotten to this point, give me a +10. Okay. Okay, just give it a moment here. If you're seeing 404, then you might not have those environment variables set. Just waiting for some +10s to roll in here. Just going back here again to show folks. We set that one there. We're going to open up that port. We're going to click on this link here. It's going to open this new tab. I know I can't make this bigger, but it's /APIs home. We have it in instructions there. So we're getting some 10s in. Again, if things are hard, don't worry. This is recorded. We can watch through them again. If you are in the Discord, there's a lot of support there. I do office hours throughout the week. After this live stream is over, right away we do a backend Q&A in the Discord. Okay, so I'm just checking for time. We are good for time. So now we are able to run it locally. So to stop the server, if you're running it, I'm just going to hit up here. You hit Control-C on your keyboard. It says right here, Control-C. Okay, that sends a kill command, a signal that's like a Linux thing, a kill command to quit it. So I do Control-C, and that stops it. Okay. If you're having trouble there, you can always just kill your terminal by hitting the trasher. I know it's really small. And you could always open a new terminal by going here and going to New Terminal. Okay. So getting some 10s here. Again, if some of you are stuck, we can help in office hours and in the Discord. So now that we've been able to run it locally, it'd be so much nicer if we could run in a container because it would do some stuff. We wouldn't have to run that one command at least, but imagine you had a more complex system with like 10s or 20 commands. A container, once you define it once, you don't have to continually reconfigure your machine. In fact, Gitpod that we're using right now runs on Docker. So we're running Docker within Docker, if you can believe that. I'm not sure if that's exactly how it works, but that's how it feels like it is how we're using it today. So what we'll do is go back to our instructions, which is somewhere here. Here they are, I think. Yep. And we'll take a look at what's next. So we ran, I said Python, but it's really Flask, and we have our Docker file. And so we are ready to start building our Docker file. Before we do that, I have a question. Why do we have to do square braces? Do we have to do square braces in parentheses here? Why is it broken up like this? Is there any particular reason, or is it just ritual, or?
There are other ways you can actually run that. You're not restricted by that method. There's a few different ways you can do it.
Is there any reason why I couldn't just do this?
Off the top of my head, usually I play around with this incrementally, in all honesty.
Okay, well that's great because that's what I do. And if you're saying that and you're a Docker captain, then I feel validated that I have more confidence here because I just see everyone doing this. I'm not exactly sure why. Sometimes there's reasons I have to make it as a separate script. There's stuff there. We have this exposed port thing, but we'll talk about these. We'll come back to these in a moment. Let's just go try to actually build this. So for this container, we have environment, but there's those two environment variables that we did not set. What I want to do before we proceed is I want to clear out those environment variables. because I just want to rule them out. I want to make sure that they're not interfering with our learning here. I'm going to go back here, and I mean, this will unset it. How do we delete? Oh, is it unset? Okay. I'm getting a whisper in my ear. They're saying to write unset. If we do unset, an equals like this. Oh, sorry. Okay. So if we do this and we hit enter, that should clear it out. And so if I type in env grep backend, it's gone, right? If I go and type in front end, it is still there. So what we'll do is we will go up to unset, and I'll do front end URL. Okay, I will go ahead and grep and look for it. Those are gone. Okay, so let's go over that again. Unset front end, unset back end. I get a plus 15 if you've unset both the front end and the back end.
And if you just do env there and return, yeah, that's quite a lot.
Yeah, that's why I wasn't hitting it. I know, eh? Okay, great. So if you want to confirm as a student, I'm not going to ask you to confirm with me, but if you type in env grep and you do underscore URL, you shouldn't see those two variables in there anymore. Okay, we showed this in the other instructional videos. I was showing you how to use grep. It's used for searching, so we're matching on the part. Those have those there. They should be unset. The reason I wanted to unset them was I can't remember if Docker files will take in the environment variables that are already set in the system. So I wanted to rule those out in case we have a learning experience here that we can do. So what I want you to do is go back to the instructional content here. I'm going to make this bigger. I can see it's really small. And we want to run this line, docker build -t backend flask. Before we do that, please confirm where you are. Look at where you are. We need to make sure we're back in our app and not in this folder here. Because I think we're running it from one directory up. Let me double check. Like we could build it from here, but I just want to go back a directory to make our lives a bit easier. So I'm going to type in pwd to show me where I am, print working directory. I'm going to go cd ... I type clear. And so you all should be in your home or project directory. Can I get a +20 if you're in your project directory here? +20 if you are in your back there, in your root directory here, your home directory, +20s. Okay. I just want to see a few more +20s come in. Great. Okay. So what we'll do is we'll go back here and we'll copy this line. We'll paste it in. Sometimes it's a bit tricky to paste in Gitpod. I realize that. If you have to, right-click copy, right-click paste. Great, I'm seeing +20s roll in. And so I have this command here. It says docker build -t backend flask /backend flask. I'm going to hit enter, and we're going to see what it does. So it's downloading the file, or sorry, it's downloading the image. Remember, we had that Python thing at the top there. Notice these steps: step 2, step 3, step 4. Remember James talking about layers. Things happen in layers. Those are laters. And then it's downloading stuff. We're seeing our layers again. It says successfully built backend flask latest. Great. So can I get a +100 if you were able to build your image and it says successfully built?
Hey, Andrew.
Yes.
One thing I kept seeing come up was people were trying to understand the distinction between the host OS and the guest OS.
Yes. So it was, I want to make it clear that the language I was using was confusing because that is more applicable to virtual machines. So when we're dealing with virtual machines, and I can bring up a document to make this more clear. I can't always remember all my knowledge, but it always comes back to me as I'm working. So when we are talking about the host OS and guest OS, your host OS is the host. It's the actual operating system. So imagine you have a computer in your house, a physical computer, and it runs an operating system. That would be the host OS. There's no abstraction. You can touch it. You can see it's right there. A guest OS, it has to do with virtualization. So we figured out, like, imagine this big line's your computer here, or your server, your hardware, server, physical computer, like actual computer. Okay. All right. So on your physical computer, you've installed Windows, Mac, something like that, that host OS. We figured out this technology called a hypervisor. And a hypervisor is a fancy word for technology that lets you virtualize a computer onto your computer. Okay. And so the idea is that when you have this software running called a hypervisor, then you can have guest OSs. And so this is a virtualization, a complete simulation of a host OS running, guest OSs running on your host OS. And so that's what we meant there. But the way it works for containers is different. So for containers, you can have a host OS, but then you would have a container daemon, right? And then it would run containers instead. And the key difference is that a guest OS is virtualizing a lot more stuff. It's simulating a lot of stuff where a container isn't. It's actually sharing stuff. I'm trying to find this. It's actually sharing stuff like kernel stuff and stuff underneath with the host OS. Okay. So this is full virtualization. This is like a bit of like, it's kind of like virtualization, but it's not doing all of the work. It's sharing stuff below. And this can actually get more complicated because you can technically have a hypervisor and then run daemons on top of it, but this is the best simplification. So when I was talking about guest and host OS, I just got confused, and really I should have been saying like container and host OS. So hopefully that clarifies, and I apologize for forgetting that stuff there. So I'll drag that off screen there. We'll come back here. I'm looking for plus 100s. I see a few plus 100s. So folks, I want to see just a few more here. Were you able to run this? Folks, can I see plus 100s again if you're able to get to this part, build the image? Okay. Okay, great. So we got a lot of hundreds coming in. Good. So what we'll do here is we'll take a look at this command and see what we ran. So we have docker build, so build the image. We have -t. So -t is for, is it naming it?
Yeah.
It's to tag
Tagging it?
with a specific name. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is
Right?
the
Yeah.
-t's for tag? So people wonder, it's like, I find like I do things so often that I forget the meaning of it, and I just like write it in, and I remember that part. We did period /backend. The reason we did this is we said, look in the current directory. So the current directory we were in was at the top level here. And then we said, go into this backend Flask folder, right? And what it's looking for is a Docker file. I didn't have to write Docker file. It just knows by default to look for one. So it found this file and it ran that file, and then it installed it. But the question is, where did it build our Docker file? Where is it in my files? I don't see it anywhere. It's somewhere, right? So the question is where is it? Well, if we go to our tab on the left-hand side here, remember we said we installed this thing for convenience, the Docker tab. I'm going to click here and go to Docker. You'll notice it says backend Flask. We have an image here. Okay. If we typed in a command, I think it's Docker images.
Yep.
I'm going to make this a little bit, I'm going to squish this a bit more so that it goes on the next line here. Docker images. And we zoom out a little bit. You can see the same thing here. So it's built an image. Where it lives, I don't know, but it's somewhere on our computer. I'm sure it's in a folder somewhere. Right? It's on our computer. It's on our computer somewhere. Either James or Edie. Somewhere.
Essentially, within Docker, you will have a /var directory, and within this, it will be layered away. You will essentially have all of those different layers, which make up that concept of it being an image. It's not a single file. It's a construct of many things that we view as one component, one image.
So, but I guess it's not something we need to fiddle with, right? Like we let Docker take care of it.
Yes.
But it is somewhere and it looks like something. So it is on our computer. So we did that and that worked all great. I know we haven't talked about this. We'll come back to that. So that helped us build the image. Notice here that we have a tag. So this says latest 3.1 Slim Buster. Over here, we have an image ID. We have a repository, backend Flask, Python. Okay. So I know we used the -t flag, which I kind of thought was for, I thought it standard for tag, but it clearly named the repository. So
no,
yes?
it does stand for tag. You're right there.
So I guess my question is like, why when I do Docker images, is the tag name the repository, and then there's a tag, and then this tag's called latest?
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, if you were to run, so if you did docker build -- help, if you do that now, you can see it actually says the -t -- tag list, and then it actually puts it in name : tag. I do see what you're getting at there, because it is confusing, because typically you would refer to tag as a label, as you were actually showing at the start. You were showing, or you can think of tags as different versions. So yes, in this concept where you've got -t meaning the name and the tag, I can see the confusion, but you were right. It does officially stand for tag.
Yeah.
Okay,
In this case, Andrew, you didn't specify the tag, so it put like latest, right, by default.
Yes.
So I guess my thought is, or my question here is that to follow the naming convention, I'm not going to run this. I'm just going to show folks. I'm going to put it in a scratch pad here. I'm just doing it in my README really quick. So here we had this. Would you say, like, if I did this, this would have been name the repository Flask and tag it with a tag called latest? Or maybe I do like 1.0.0 for the tag?
So what happens with Docker, if you don't specify a tag, it will by default use that tag of latest. So if, for example, this applies when you're actually building images or pulling images. If you did a Docker pull Ubuntu, it would automatically be doing Docker pull Ubuntu : latest. And so yes, essentially those two commands that you see there are identical. It will have the same outcome. Now, something just to be aware of, because latest is, this tag of latest is sometimes seen by some, it's considered an anti-pattern, because it does not necessarily mean the latest image of something. It is just a default tag. And if you were only working with one tag of latest and you were pushing, then yes, that image, if you pushed it to somewhere else, would be the latest image. But if you were working and you were doing stuff and you were like, I'm going to tag this as version 1, I'm going to tag this as version 2, I'm going to tag this as version 3, and I'm not going to tag this, so it ends up as latest, it doesn't necessarily mean it's the latest one.
I see.
Just treat latest as a default tag, rather than the implicit meaning of it being, hey, I'm getting the latest.
Yeah, so this is where I found Docker hard, was the consistency of the actual using the CLI. And I've been using Docker for years, like years. I don't even know how long it's, like, I've been using it for, like, I don't know, 5, 7 years, however long it's been around for. And even to this day, because I don't use it every day, like I'll use it for a bit and then it'll be like a month or two later, or I'll be using the most basic commands. And I look at it and I go, how does this work again? So for me, it's not natural. So for folks, if you're struggling with Docker, it's been a long struggle for me for forever. But if you get down the commands that you need to use on a day-to-day basis, you'll be a-okay. So we'll go back to here and we'll look at the last command we ran. So that was the command we ran. And so that's pretty great. I guess the question is that I didn't set those envars. And so I'm expecting as we noticed before, that this should fail. If we try to run this, I expect it to fail to run properly because we didn't set those environment variables. And that's what we're going to find out. So what I want to do is I want to go back over here and we have Docker. This is our Docker build one. And then we have our run command. Okay. So I'm going to copy this next command. I'm going to go here. I'm going to type in clear. I'm going to paste it in. Bootcampers, I want you to copy and paste this next command in. And we're going to hit enter. And we'll see if it runs, and then we'll talk about the command. So it's started up for me. I'm seeing 120.0.0.1, but notice here it's running on all addresses. Remember I said this 0.0.0 is the everywhere address? Well, it says all addresses. So it sounds like my definition's right. It's starting at 4567. If we go over to ports, we have this dot here. I think it indicates that it's running. If it was empty, I think it would run. I'm going to just kill it for a second. I'm going to do Control C. Can I do that? I'm going to go back here. Notice the port is empty. I'm going to make this bigger so you can see. Notice that it is empty. And when I go and run it, I hit up on my keyboard to run it again. It fills in. That's how you know that it's running. Okay, we'll just zoom back out. So I'm going to ask you folks, do you see the dot running? Is your lock unlocked? And then go ahead and click through and we should get a not found. So give me a plus 200, a 200 if you're able to get it running using the Docker run command. And you get a 404 error. The 404 error is what I'm expecting you to see. Great. And the folks that are asking about the repo not being updated, make sure you're checking the correct branch. I've been pasting the link in here. I can try to paste instructions in here again. I'll paste it in here again. They are up to date because it's in place. Okay, so the 404, the reason we're getting that error is because we haven't set the environment variables. I'm going to stop this app here. And so one way that we could do this is we can modify this command. Okay, so what we can do, I'm just going to go into Scratchpad here. What we can do is we can, whoops. And bootcampers, you need to do this as well. You got to follow along. I can go in front of here. I can set Frontend URL. And I'm going to do asterisk. And we'll do backend URL equals asterisk. If this is a bit hard for folks, I'm going to go and copy this into the instructions just so that it saves you some typing. Whoops. And we will go back over here. I'm just going to edit this here. I'm going to go down to our instructions for this week here for running it. I didn't copy the whole command. One second. Yeah, copying and pasting for Gitpod is a bit tricky, so I got to go copy. It's not just Gitpod; it's any kind of whenever you have an editor in your browser. So I'll paste that in there. I believe that is right. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to say, let's set just for this command, not forever, but just for this command, we're going to set frontend URL, the backend environment URL when it runs this. So my question is this going to work? We'll find out here in a moment. Okay. I'm expecting this to fail for a few reasons. I'm going to run it. It starts up. I go back. I check the port. We still have not found. What? I thought I passed them. I know why it's not working. There's a few different reasons why. Okay. And so this is where we put on our debugging hat. We say, okay, well, I tried to pass environment variables here. This would normally work. This is a regular app. So is the issue that when I did the environment variables that I did not pass them during the run? Is it because I need to set them in here? Right? Is it in the build step? Is it in the run step? Is it the command that I did? Now I know the answer, but I'm going to Edie and James, what would you do if you had to debug this? What would you think that like, where would you put it?
Do you want to go, Edie?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I was asking, do you want to go?
When I have this problem, I try to check with Docker logs. I'm not sure if this is something to troubleshooting the problem.
Let's check out Docker logs. So folks, when you have a container running, bootcampers, when you have a container running, they'll show up running over here on the Docker tab. Now there is a command. I'm just going to make this larger. I know it's so hard to see, but we click on our whale. In the top up here, we have containers running, and here it's running. There's a green thing. It says it's good. If I right click this, I can view the logs. Okay. And it's going to show me how the app started. It's actually basically the same thing here. Okay. But the question is the environment variable set? We don't know. So if we wanted to know that the environment variables were set, for bootcampers, just watch. You don't have to do this. What I would do is we check the logs. That's always the best place to check first. The second thing I do is I say, okay, well, the logs aren't showing me anything. How do I know that anything is set? Well, let's get it to output to the logs. If we go over to backend Flask, I'm going to do a little bit of Python code. I'm not the best at Python, but I'm sure I can figure it out.
Just before you do,
because
we just before you make changes, so just to add another option into this, and I think if you go back to the right click, where you right clicked on the container, do the attach shell.
Oh, you know what? That's been there forever. I've never even tried it. I always do it the manual way. Do you think it'll work?
In answer to your question, I was going to say a different way, which would be, essentially running a Docker exec, attaching a shell to it, doing the same process as this. But this, when you right clicked, I saw that and I thought, okay, that's nice. So technically, you could run env here as well, and you could see what environment variables exist in the container. So if you do env,
I was just going to say, I never, ever thought of clicking this, even though I've done it so many times. I've always ran this command to get in. So folks are wondering, we just got into the shell of this. We're in the machine right now. We're in the container. And I was going to show later on in the step how we could do it.
Often as well. With command line habit, I will do that Docker exec -it container name and bash, which is what you can see at the end. But that's a much quicker way. If we do env, do we see it?
That's why we got the experts here. So I'm going to type in env, and we'll just hit enter. And so you can see there's fewer environment variables, get pod sets a lot, and it's not there, right? So what I was going to do, you can see there's more than one way to figure out a problem. Another way would have been we could have logged or puts out in here. So I was going to try this. I was going to go printf. And then I was going to say Frontend here. And I was just going to see if it shows up. This way is another way. It doesn't matter which way you do it. This is probably an easier way, but you can see no environment variable set. So that's why we're getting a 404 error. So I'm just going to close out of the shell. Maybe just type exit. Will that work? And will it be reused by tasks? I don't know. So I'm going to close the tab. And we're going to stop this container. For all our bootcampers, I want you to stop the container. We have someone asking, well, how do you set env on Windows? You don't. I mean, maybe, but we're on a Linux operating system, so if it's another way, they might be virtualizing Linux to do it. I'm not sure. We're only providing support for Gitpod. I'm so sorry. So this container, I'm trying to turn it off, Control C, but it's not working. So if you run into this issue where you do Control C, like I'm doing right now, it doesn't work, go to the top here. We can right click and stop our container. This is just another way to stop it. My container is now stopped. I'm just going to close up the logs. I'm back over here. So I just want a plus 30 if you've stopped your container. To all the students here. A plus 30 if you've stopped your container. Great. Okay. So we don't have those environment variables in there. Now, one solution could be to set them in here. We can do envar in here, right? But I think that there's also a way to pass environment variables with a flag. I think there's like a -e flag. And I think I have it in here. -e. Docker hub run nvar pass. I'm just going to show folks like how I would find it. So if we go to the documentation, I'm almost certain that's -e because we've done this a few times. But if we go here, how to set environment variables. So you can ingest an environment variable, but I'm just looking for doing that with a -e. So we'll give it a try.
What I do just out of practice there, which is quite nice, for every command with Docker and every sub command, you can do --help. So if you just put docker run and then you put --help after it and then pipe to more or less, whichever you prefer, more or less. But there you go. There it was. -e was just scroll down. There you go.
Okay. Yep. I guess the only thing is it doesn't show us the syntax, but I think it would probably just match how we normally do it. So what I'll do is I'll go to my Scratchpad, wherever you want to write this stuff in here, and I'm going to modify this. I'm going to take this line, and we're going to take a -e. I know this looks a bit funny, but we'll cut it. And I'm going to put it on the end. Sometimes these things matter where you put them. I don't think in this case it does. So I'm getting whispers in my ear. Bako does this all the time, and he's suggesting that this is the syntax. That's wrong? What is it supposed to be? Just equals?
I always do the -e individually. So there may be many ways to actually do this, but yes, I will typically do dash. Yeah.
Oh. Okay. If you're wondering why I'm like sitting here, it's because Bako's whispering in my ear. He's like, because he does this all the time. He's telling me that if we do -e and we put in the environment variable here, it will pipe it from our machine. So if they're already set, it will get passed along.
Nice.
Is that right, Bako? Okay, that's what he's saying. So that means that if that's the case, then we need to set these locally. So Bako, I know we can't hear Bako, but Bako, if I was to set the environment variables and then not use -e, they would not pass along. Okay, so that's interesting. So, okay, so remember when we had set those earlier? That's what we want to do. So we're going to do set frontend URL.
Just to add to this, though, you can also, as well, Andrew, you can specify them implicitly on that command line. So you could do -e frontend URL equals and then a quote single string, which would save you setting them locally.
I see. So I guess Bako wasn't sure if we could do that or not. That's what I originally was going to do.
I didn't know about Bako's trick, though, so that was quite nice. I didn't know that it actually reads it off the local either.
So folks, we have experts upon experts, like just layers of people here helping us. So what I'm hearing is that we could either have done this. Okay. Kind of like the implicit one, but Bako wasn't sure. Or what we can do is we can do this. I know, it's all confusing. So I'm going to just say follow along with the one I'm doing. So set the backend URL this way, and then set the frontend URL this way. Okay. And then we're gonna run this command. And I'll copy and paste all of these variations in here. All I care is that it works. Whichever one you want to do, it's going to change here. So failed to create the shim, OCI, runtime, etc. Path not found. I don't like the look of that. I'm going to go try this
just
one
a second.
Instead.
Just something to note there, because this is a special case. In this case, I would quote rather than actually using double, use single quotes, because from a shell perspective, a star in double quotes can get interpreted as like a directory list of all of the files.
Sure.
Yeah.
We'll try this.
Yeah.
So much variation. I know it gets confusing, but boot campers, the thing is, we'll settle on something. You'll find that it's easier as we go. It's just that we're going through variations for learning. It's not really this hard in practice. It's just that we're trying to show you all the debugging steps so that we can fail together as opposed to you fail alone and then wonder what's going on. So I do that, and we see the same thing. Failed to create the shim task, OCI run, unable to start the container process, -e, executable file not found. So it's looking for the file. The options.
No, it's your ordering. What you need to do is you need to put backend -flask on the end, because that's the name of the move that to the end.
See.
Yeah, and
so you know what I was thinking was because we had the -it there, I thought that the T would follow it because the last command was like that.
Yeah, no. What ended up? Yeah, so let's see. What ended up happening was it interpreted those as overrides for the command that the container is running, because it came after the container image. So your last point should always be that container image, unless you want to override the command.
I'll hit enter here. There we go. Okay, so then this one probably would have worked as well. We just probably had to take this part here. Boot campers, are you confused? If you're confused, can you give me question marks? Because like, so that's a lot of variations. You okay? I know it seems hard, but like this is what I was saying when I have a hard time with Docker. It's because like the ordering matters. There's variations that do it. But once you settle on something that works for you, you just stick to it, and then you don't have problems. I know, right? Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy. I like this one here because then we don't have to set them. And I'll go back up here. You can't get more real than this. And I'm going to just make sure this command's in here so we can learn later. So there's this, and there was this one. And we have, I'm going to go here. We're going to say run the image was down below here. So at this variation, and we had that variation. I'm just going to copy all the cases here. It'll be up to you to make sense of these instructions. Okay, I'll go back here and unset it. And I'll go update that just so that folks that are following along, they can copy paste this stuff. But boot campers, what I want you to do is try to copy. I'm going to just take out this line here. So I'm suggesting that you copy this one here, because that one is going to be the easiest one, I think, to run is this one. Okay. And so once you run this line, so I'm already running it. I'm going to go to my ports. I'm going to see that 4567 is unlocked. I'm not sure why there's 4566. Did it open a second one by accident? Oh, look at that. The port's different. How did that happen? One moment. We have a spelling mistake. I'm so sorry. 4567. I'm going to stop this. I'm going to paste it in here again. It is not pasting today. One more time. Enter. Okay, so it starts up. Okay, the little dot should not be there. This one is there. I open the new tab. And we'll type in API activities home, and I get it. Okay. Boot campers. Type in 99. Type in 99 on the chat if you made it to here. If you somehow made it to here. If you haven't made it to here, give me zeros. I'm so glad we're all able to follow along. I really appreciate that. I'm sorry for folks that if that got a bit messy, but this is the nature of it. This is the real experience that we're trying to learn here as we go through it. Okay, so we're able to run it. I'm going to go back to my instructions, which was here. Zoom out. So we built a Dockerfile. We're running the container. There's some other things. I'm just going to gloss over these because we only have 20 more minutes, and I want to get us to run Docker Compose. But there's this flag here for -d, so we can run it in the background. Generally, that's the way you want to run it. Then there's, we can see how we can pass an environment variable. This is just setting environment variable, but here we have the -rm command. This means remove. So when we stop the container, the image will get cleaned up. We did a Docker images earlier. We haven't done a Docker PS. So if we go back to the terminal here, now this is running, and I say click the plus here. So we have another bash terminal. Give it a second to open. It takes a bit of time. And I'm going to run Docker PS. Okay, I'm going to just zoom out a bit because it's a bit hard to see. So boot campers, can you go and open a new bash terminal? There's a little plus here. I know it's hard to see. Or if you can't see, you can go to the top left corner, go to terminal, new terminal, and then run Docker PS. If you've done that, give me a 50. Great. So notice up here in the top left corner, these are the containers that are running. This, when you do Docker PS, it's basically this. When you do Docker images, it's the stuff down here. So when we stop a container, it doesn't. I guess there's some cleanup that can be involved. James, Edie.
Say your question again. Sorry.
The -rm command. So we didn't run it, but like that's to clean up, to do some cleanup.
Yeah. So what will happen by default if you run a container with Docker run and you didn't have the --rm, what would actually happen is the container would stop and it would go into an exited state. And if you did a Docker PS, you wouldn't see it. But if you did a Docker PS-A, you would see it. And essentially, the reason being, sometimes you'll want to run a container and you'll want it to remain afterwards. For example, you might want to go in and grab the logs from it or grab something from it. You might have something that actually runs, does something, and then finishes. So you could actually go back and pick up artifacts. But in a lot of cases, when you're using Docker from the command line conveniently, you're treating containers like cattle, i.e. you're running them, they finish, and you just want them to go away. You don't want them clogged up on your system. And that's what --rm does. Essentially, as soon as the container stops, Docker will reap that container and get rid of it. So okay. So you did a PS-A, and so we can see that one is, it's still running at the moment. Yeah.
Well, it is running over here, but if I stop it, right? If I was to stop this and kill it, it probably would be gone, right?
Correct.
Because this one's not running in the background.
Yeah.
I see. Okay. So I wanted us to try to get to the Docker Compose. So we're going to skip a little bit of this. Like we actually did it. We didn't skip it. We just did it out of order. So like we were going to run this command to get into the container. We just right clicked instead, right? We wanted to override the ports. I showed this. This is not accurate apparently, but we figured out how to insert environment variables. So what I want to do is quickly get us to set up the front end. Should be pretty easy. What we're going to do is we're going to go to terminal and make sure that you're in the right directory, your home directory here. And I want you to cd into your front end application, so front end, and we'll do an npm install. Okay, so we'll do an npm install. So all students, I want you to do that. While it's doing the npm install, we want to try to save time so we can fit this in the next 15 minutes. This is going to be running. I want you to go to your front-end React.js directory. You're going to make a new file. We're going to call it dockerfile. And then we're going to go over. We're going to copy the contents here, this file. We are going to paste it in here. Okay. This should be done installing. And then I want you to go back a directory and say cd ... And so we should be there. So can I get a +12? A +12 if you've created the Docker file, you've copied the contents for the Frontend React.js, you've done npm install, and you've gone back a directory. That's a lot of things. A +12. So we're grabbing the contents of this file, putting it here in the Dockerfile folder. We cd'd into this directory. We ran npm install, and then we went back a directory. So I'm seeing +12, so that's great. So what I want to do now we should run this container to make sure it works, but I'm pretty confident it will work. If it doesn't work for you, we'll find out here in a moment. But I want to get to the Docker Compose. So because we're doing the same thing here, we're building it, we're running it, we're making sure that it runs. This one's going to run on port 3000. The other one ran on port 4567. So we want to create this Docker Compose YAML file. So I'm going to go over here. I'm going to right click. I'm going to type in Docker Compose.yaml. And I'm going to copy the contents here of this Docker YAML file. We're going to paste it in. And there's a lot going on in this file. Now, folks, we're running out of time here, so I will make additional content to supplement what we're kind of glossing over. But the idea here is that we have two services, and the purpose of this Docker Compose file is to allow us to run multiple containers at the same time. Because if we had to run both those containers, we would have had to open two different tabs in our terminal and run them separately, or run them in the background one after another. But using Docker Compose makes it so much easier to orchestrate multiple containers that have to work together locally. So you need to copy and paste that content. And you'll notice that we're passing those environment variables, so we don't have to worry about setting them. They get set in this file here. We're mapping the ports. We're mapping the volumes. We're doing all sorts of stuff. We will talk about that in a follow-up video. So if you've created the file, the next thing is to do Docker Compose up. Now we can do it there. That's one way of doing it. I didn't hit enter. We could also write Docker Compose up, right? But the way I'm going to do it, I'm going to go over here to the left-hand side because I like to make my life super easy, especially when I'm working in VS Code. I right-click, and there's a command down below that says Compose up. I'm going to click that. I'm going to see if it works. Okay. So what it's doing is it's basically doing a Docker build and then a Docker run on both those containers that we had before, while also configuring the environment variables and mounting and stuff like that. Who knew environment variables were so hard?
Yeah, I did see a few questions popping up about the environment variables.
Yeah. It's just how it goes. So that'll take a little bit of time. The reason it takes time is because remember we went to Docker Hub, it has to download those images locally. But once they're downloaded once, they're usually pretty darn quick. So it's not like they're going to download them every single time. But we'll get those downloaded. And it shouldn't take too long. But the idea is that what we're waiting for is to see them show up on these two ports. While it's going, we can talk about this file. So I want to go to the top here. And so this is called the Docker Compose file. It's in YAML format. It's in a totally different format than the other file. One interesting thing here is the back of the build thing. So this is the same thing as remember when we said to go to that directory. This is where the Docker file expects to be. I guess there's not much to talk about, and it's running. So I'm going to go down to my ports. And so what you should see here is the old ones still show up here. So that was by accident, but we have port 3000. That's our front end. And then we have 4567. That is our back end. Make sure both are unlocked because sometimes it doesn't unlock them. So both should be unlocked, 4567 and port 3000. I'm going to zoom out so I can see the link. I'm going to click the link. Fingers crossed. And you should see something, right? It should be the application. Now, it should be showing some code here. So I'm going to right click here. I'm going to go to inspector and says what is wrong. It's always cores. I cannot tell you how often cores issues happen, but it's constant and it drives me crazy. You're going to learn to hate cores just like me in this course. But it's not communicating to the backend. So I'm going to go back here for a moment. You know why? It's because there's a bug here. This is supposed to be 3000. So I'm going to change that to 3000. I'm going to go back here. The reason why there's mistakes with those port numbers is that when I was building this out, I had to use different port numbers. So I'm doing Command C to stop this Docker compose. Okay, so stop. And I'm going to go back here. I'm going to do compose up. Now, you didn't have to kill it. You could just compose up. So I've switched that out to 3000. Notice it's not downloading the images again. It's going a lot faster. It's building them again, but it's not downloading them from the internet. The base images there, the Python or anything else. So we'll go back over here and we'll have to wait for it to build. And I think this time it will work. So go back over to the ports. While that is going, I'm going to go back to the documentation here. I'm going to fix that so that anyone who's copying and pasting isn't going to run into that trouble there. Go down here to the YAML file. I'm just going to change this over to 3000. We will commit the changes. How are we doing for time? Oh, we got some time. Go back over here. And so this is now running, starting. It's almost done. We'll go to the ports. We can see 3000 started, 4567 is started. I'm checking to see if the locks are unlocked. They are. Very good. I'm going to click on the 3000 link. And I can see data. So the backend and the front end are talking. We are running multiple containers. There's a lot going on. Edie or James, do you want to say anything about Docker Compose?
Edie, and then I'll go.
There are people asking if the Docker Compose is there in the repo.
So just to confirm, folks, we created this in the root directory here of Docker Compose YAML. Bootcampers, how many were you able to get this working? Give me a 1 if you could get it working. Give me a 0 if you were not able to get CRUD working, showing the back and front end. I know this part is hard. Got +1s. Great. So as you can see, like these are very common issues that I have is like I got the port numbers wrong, the environment variables are not set. How do I debug them? How do I log into them? One thing that I'd like to note is that if we make any changes, because the volumes are mounted from here to there, if I make any change, it should be reflected in the application. So see here, it says cloud is fun. I'm going to go into the backend Flask app. I'm going to go to app.py. Sorry, I'm going to go into services here. And we're going to go into the home activities. Let's see where it says cloud is fun. I'm going to say cloud is very fun. I'm going to save that. I'm going to go back to my app. Notice that it updated. It now says very fun. So it's just like doing local development. If you know how to mount the volumes correctly in your Docker Compose file, because that's what it's doing. It's saying, look at this directory and mount it here. So any changes get reflected over there. And so I can just develop as per normal, and that works out pretty well. Now, there are edge cases where sometimes you have to stop and restart the containers. But for the most part, once you're at this place and you get used to working this way, it becomes easy. But debugging environment variables is always hard. Working, again, getting into the machine, knowing how to read the logs, dealing with Docker commands, that's where my pain points are. Edie or James, is there any other kind of pain points that might help beginners to worry about or to help avoid working with Docker?
Well, your last question was asking about Compose, and generally, when I'm starting most projects, I will typically do things in 2 stages. I will have my Docker file ready to go in one directory where I will actually have that. I'll make convenient shell scripts for myself. So build this, run this, and these commands that you've actually been going through, just having those there. So that would typically be my my go-to structure for any Docker image that I'm working on. And then in tandem, I usually have the Docker Compose file to actually run that image. And a little bit different to how you've got it here. You've used the build functionality within Docker Compose. I typically don't do that. I will normally just specify the image. I will say, use this image. And yeah, Docker Compose is my go-to for prototyping apps. And even if I've got one container, I will typically start it from Compose and build it up in parallel. And that works really well for me.
Why is there Docker -compose up and then there's Docker Compose up? Why is there all these varying syntaxes or alternate syntaxes? Why isn't there just one syntax for Docker?
Well, the reason being, so traditionally Docker Compose was, as you actually say it, Docker-compose. And if historically, Docker Compose used to be separate to Docker. So you would, if you wanted Compose, you would install Docker and then you would install Compose. And then they bundled it. And within Docker, the plugins functionality works. So for example, you've got the Docker executable, and there's a binary called docker-compose, and there's another one called docker-extension, and Docker will automatically translate that. So, docker-extension can be run as docker space extension, and it's the same with Compose. That's the way the plugin structure works with the Docker hierarchy internally.
So would you say it's maybe like they started with one syntax and they decided to change it, and now we support both of them, or are we leaning towards the new syntax?
Well, they essentially they were and they are independent projects, and this is really the move. The direction certainly is to go to the Docker space. That is what I would say is the preferred best practice. But yeah, just so you know, with that, you can use either. And if you use Docker-compose, you're running the Docker-compose executable directly. If you run Docker space compose, you're running Docker, and then it's treating it as a plugin, and it in turn is just running Docker-compose. And they built the framework for Docker so that it can be extensive. They can build all of these other plugins, and it's interesting because there's a similar kind of thing with kubectl with Kubernetes. So Kubernetes plugins will have kubectl dash a name, but then from kubectl you can just run them kubectl space name. So
I think we talked about this earlier, where there was some other commands in Docker where it was like Docker build run, and I guess my thought is that sometimes I would just say, like, if the command works, use it. There are some cases where it makes more sense to use the new one. There's other cases where they're just both supported. But I guess my takeaway is, like, folks, if you're confused, I'm confused too. Just do the best you can get through it. We are out of time. So after this, I'm going to be on stage. If my guest instructors have time, they will be there as well. If they're not, you can talk to them through social media. Both James and Edie are on LinkedIn and Twitter. I strongly recommend that you reach out and follow, because they know more about Docker than I do. And so you'll get obviously lots of great information. I want to check out homework before we go here. So I have this open up here, and Edie and James help me with homework. And for those, I put in the prerequisite. If you have yet watched it, if you're new to Docker and this is all new to you, our sponsor has a fundamentals course, but Edie was also part of the pre-requirement stuff. So I put a video of one of hers in there for you to watch to get you really started into Docker. If all this was too much for you, I want to make sure that you go back there and watch it. So we're going to go to week 1, and we're going to take a look at what kind of homework that you could do as challenges for this week. So one thing was run the Docker file command as an external script, because we said there's multiple ways of doing it. We looked at Docker Hub. Now we will be pushing to ECR later, but maybe you might want to try to push a container to Docker Hub for fun. They have a free tier. Multi-stage builds, that's a more advanced feature where you have a Docker file that builds off a Docker file so that you exclude large files to keep your file images small. Implement a health check in Docker. So in your Docker compose file, this is to make sure that your containers are healthy before you run them. Research best practices of Docker files and attempt to implement your Docker file. There's so many best practices. There's a lot of them. And I think we could have listed all those as homework, but so that is stuff to do. I might add a few additional ones. I think I want to make an additional video to explore the code base, because I want you to be more comfortable before we do it. Again, I want to thank our sponsors and also our guest instructors for making time on a Saturday, especially at the time. I think it's like their dinner time. So they didn't even have dinner. They came here to help you learn today. So I really appreciate that. Okay. So I both owe you a dinner next time I see you. And I hope everyone here on the stream learned something new. We're heading over to the Discord. For those who are in the Discord, again, the Discord's private, so you had to register in time. But we will see you next week. But watch out for more videos that are coming out throughout the week, because I'm just knocking ones out every day. We'll see you soon, and thanks everyone here. Ciao.